Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about Jordan Howard being traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, former running back of the Chicago Bears for the last 3 seasons, has finally been traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, this was in much anticipation. Many of us were speculating that he would be traded sooner or later due to the fact that the Chicago Bears were willing to move on from him. They had just recently signed Mike Davis of the Seahawks this offseason to come in and do the early down work and then probably give more of the opportunity to Tarik Cohen going forward. So they've traded him to the Philadelphia Eagles, and what I'm going to be talking about today is the fantasy implications for Jordan Howard and Tarik Cohen going into the 2019 fantasy football season. I'll also mention a little bit of Mike Davis as I get into this video. So 3 specific running backs, talking about their value as we approach the 2019 fantasy football season. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into that, shall we? Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing well on this magical Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. The weekend is that much closer. You know what's hilarious? Yesterday when I was doing my my mock draft for standard 1 quarterback leagues, I literally was talking about Tarik Cohen, talking about Jordan Howard, and whether he was going to be traded, in the near future. Boom! Not even 24 hours later, we have Jordan Howard moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles, which is pretty good. I mean, honestly, I think both parties win fantasy-wise. I think this presents more value for Jordan Howard and Tarik Cohen and potentially Mike Davis, but I'll go into that. But let's talk about Jordan Howard specifically right now. Let's talk about what he was capable of doing this last season in 2018. He had a little bit of an off year. What I mean by that was his rushing total, not as good. As Tarik Cohen progressively got more and more opportunities within this offense, especially in the passing game. Jordan Howard's work and, to be honest, his fantasy totals just weren't there. He had a couple good performances later on in the back end of the season, especially weeks 14, 15, 16, 17. He was pretty consistent in the back end because he got a lot of goal line work, which he is primarily, he was the goal line back for the Chicago Bears. But this past season, he had 250 rushing attempts for 935 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns, 27 targets, and on those targets, he had 20 receptions for 145 yards, for a total of 170 half-point PPR fantasy points. So, to be honest, not bad. Having played 16 games last season, about 10.6 fantasy points per game, not terrible. But we expected him to be way better. From what I remember, Jordan Howard was a second, mid-second, late third or early third round pick last season, and around that ADP, really just didn't pan out. Torched a lot of teams, hurt many fantasy owners, and especially because of the fact that Tarik Cohen was taking a lot of the work. When I drafted yesterday in my mock draft, I think his ADP was sitting around, I think he was the number 30th or 29th ranked running back, coming off the board around the 5th or 6th round, which at this point, that would have been a steal. But now that he is on the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that is in much need of a running back that can carry the workload going forward, I mean, his ADP, his fantasy stock and value is going to skyrocket comparatively. So what do I expect from Jordan Howard? We know he's a bruising back, right? He's a guy that wants to run downhill in between the tackles, not go down after first contact, and he wants to plunge forward, be the goal line back, and succeed in that manner. And I think that's what he's going to be able to do. I mean, looking at the rest of the running backs within this offense, J.J. is a free agent. He is not going to be re-signed. Darren Sproles is likely going to retire. If he doesn't, I don't know. I'd be pretty surprised if Darren Sproles doesn't retire. Other than that, we have Wendell Smallwood, Josh Adams, Corey Clement. These are the guys that can work in for a couple snaps here and there, but I expect Jordan Howard's rush attempts and his total touches throughout the 2019 season to be similar to what he's had in the last 3 seasons. In his short tenure with the Chicago Bears, the last 3 seasons. Again, this is a younger guy. He had 281 touches his rookie season, 299 the season after, and then this past season, total of 270 touches. So I expect it to potentially get into the 300s. With such a good offensive line. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Pro Football Focus ranked the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line the 5th best at the end of the 2018 season. So with guys like Jason Peters, I understand he's getting older, but still he is He's been an elite left tackle. They have guys like Jason Kelsey, Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson. They have an elite offensive line there. All they need is for Carson Wentz to be healthy. We saw this team make a late playoff push, beat the Bears in the playoffs, and compete with the Saints. So this team believes they're ready, and if Jordan Howard is the number one back there, he's absolutely going to be a fantasy. He's going to be a fantasy relevant running back comparatively to if he stayed on the Chicago Bears. Here's the thing, in his rookie year with the Chicago Bears, Jordan Howard, 1,300 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, had the most targets of his entire career. I think about 50 targets. Obviously, there's a little bit of a stigma that, hey, Jordan Howard can't catch the ball. His reception total is not great. He had 108 targets, 72 receptions in the last 3 seasons with the Bears. Not terrible, about like a 66% catch rate. I mean, it could be better, but obviously I don't think he's being brought in to be a receiving back. That's why they have Corey Clement on the roster, Wendell Smallwood. They can go ahead and pick up those receiving down work. I don't think he's going to be a 3-down back, and I don't think many people expected him to be, Jordan Howard, that is. So, obviously his rushing total when it comes to yards wasn't great last season, but as a member of the Philadelphia Eagles, man, I'm telling you, I think his ADP is going to skyrocket. I think his fantasy value becomes that much more. I mean, again, he was coming off the board in the 5th, 6th round yesterday in that draft. I think he's going to be a solid mid-tier RB2. I think sitting around the area of where other guys like, well, let me think about this. As of right now, mid-tier RB2s could potentially be seen as guys like Derrick Henry, Chris Carson, assuming that Rashad Penny gets a little bit more work. I think, Jordan Howard can be in that conversation as guys that aren't going to get much work in the passing game, but are going to, eat up all the goal line work, eat up all the groundwork for their teams. Potentially Marlon Mack, kind of in that little stable of mid-tier RB2s. Not guys that can be considered as RB1s, like a David Johnson potentially, or a Dalvin Cook, kind of guys like that, Leonard Fournette, that are at the kind of the fringe between an RB1 and a high-end RB2. So I see him still as an RB2 going into this year. Now, I might adjust that. He could be a lower tier RB2, but as of right now, it's not a bad place to be for him. His skyrocketing ADP is going to eventually adjust itself, but we'll see. I think this is just a fantastic move. I think the Eagles get the player that they need. They address their needs as a team, and Jordan Howard, fantasy-wise, he's going to be fantastic going forward, I think, especially behind such a great offensive line. I know the Bears had a good offensive line, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but when it comes to running the ball, the Eagles, I'm sure they're capable of producing a lot of yards on the ground. Last season, game script-wise, they weren't really being put in a position to run the ball more often. They had to come back in games often, a lot of shootouts here and there. And to be honest, that kind of skewed a little bit of the pass-to-run ratio. I think the stat that I found was the Eagles threw the ball 60% of the time last year comparatively to their 40% run rate, which obviously for a starting running back, that's definitely not what you want. Comparatively to the Bears last season, who ran the ball 47% of the time and only threw the ball 53% of the time. Obviously, we expect teams to throw the ball more, but the closer that rushing total goes up, the better it is for the starting running back of that team. But anyway, I'm happy. I think this is a fantastic move. A lot of the speculation was around him going to the Eagles because the Eagles made it clear that they were looking for a starting running back when they decided not to re-sign J.J. So this is great, and I think RB2 is written all over Jordan Howard going into the 2019 season. So let's go ahead and talk about some other players. Specifically, I wanted to mention Tarik Cohen because, my goodness, I think just off of the decisions that the Chicago Bears have made, they're making it pretty well known that they believe that Tarik Cohen is going to be the lead back for this team. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to touch the ball 20 times a game. That's not the case. This last season in 2018, Tarik Cohen, on average, didn't touch the ball often. And I'll go into that statistic in a little bit, but let's talk about what his total stats were for 2018. He had 99 rushing attempts. Again, that's not a lot. For 444 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 91 targets. He was third on the Chicago Bears last season in targets, just behind Tarik Taylor Gabriel and Allen Robinson. Just a couple targets here and there, but he had 91 targets for 71 receptions, 725 receiving yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns. And he also dinked in a passing touchdown late into the regular season for 200.44 half-point PPR scoring points. To be honest, like as soon as week 3 hit in the regular season, the first 3 weeks of 2018, Tarik Cohen, he wasn't producing. But as soon as week 4 came along, the guy was just a completely different machine. In the back end of the season, the final 13 games, he had 10 games of 10 points or more. He had games that he had a 30-point fantasy game. He had a consistent 3 weeks in a row where it was like 17, 17, 18. The guy was just completely tearing it up. And to be honest, none of that was on the ground. Tarik Cohen, on average last season, carried the ball 6 times. The most times he ran the ball in a singular game was 13 rushing attempts, and it was in week 4. That was the last time he saw a high number. The next highest was, I think, 9 rushing attempts late in the season. So he never got many touches on the ground. So majority of his work came from the passing game. And to be honest, even with Jordan Howard leaving, obviously that doesn't get affected. So what does get affected? His rushing attempts are going to increase. Now that Jordan Howard, who ran the ball 250 times last season for the Chicago Bears, is finally gone, Tarik Cohen is absolutely going to see more rushing attempts. Now, I don't expect him to give him 200 rushing attempts, right? Obviously, we saw a smaller guy like Christian McCaffrey carry the ball a bunch of times this last season for the Carolina Panthers. I still don't believe Tarik Cohen is that kind of a running back, but he still has room to show us that he's capable of doing so. And potentially Matt Nagy can come up, the head coach of the Chicago Bears, and he can give him the ball 200 times this season and surprise the hell out of all of us. But I don't potentially see that being the case going into 2019. But I absolutely do believe that he is going to see more touches on the ground. I mean, 99 rushing attempts for 400 yards, man, that's a pretty good average. 444 yards. Anyway, so again, let's talk a little bit more about his touches. Last season, he had a total of 170 touches for the entire season. 99 rushing attempts, 71 receptions. Now, I did the math on this, and every time Tarik Cohen touched the ball last season, he scored 1.18 fantasy points per touch. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous. The guy touches the ball, he's guaranteed a point. 1.18 points per touch, which is pretty awesome last season comparatively to a guy like Jordan Howard, who had 270 touches and only 170 fantasy points, which isn't a great ratio. Other than that, Tarik Cohen last season led the team, the Chicago Bears, in receptions. He was a couple targets away from passing up Allen Robinson, if I'm not mistaken. It was about 3 or 4 targets. 24 yards away from being the leading receiver on this team. I mean, he was up there when it comes to receiving stats. He was competing with the number 1 wide receiver technically within this team. Other than that, I mean, again, Tarik Cohen had 100 less touches than Jordan Howard did last season. Imagine if he can get 50 of those. Imagine. I mean, he's just going to be such a great running back, a guy that honestly now, even though, I mean, I thought he was an RB2 already, even with Jordan Howard on the team. Goodness gracious, he's gonna fly up. He's gonna be in that conversation, and I'll go into that. I'll talk to you guys about who I would rather have, Jordan Howard or Tarik Cohen, in a little bit. But before we go into that, I want to talk about Tarik Cohen's red zone work, because I think it's pretty important considering he's not moving teams. We can go ahead and dissect a little bit of the red zone work he got last season. But before we get into that, I just wanted to mention. So last season, the Chicago Bears had 511 passing attempts, and Tarik Cohen had 91 of those potential targets. So he accounted for 17.8% of the offensive targets. I mean, that in itself, I mean, if he gets to about 100 this next season, he can be 20% of the passing game. I mean, goodness, that's a pretty good amount. I mean, looking at other receivers like DeAndre Hopkins or Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, those guys are getting 30% of their respective teams' offensive targets. So a running back out of the backfield getting 20%, that's pretty ridiculous. I understand he got 17.8 last season, but I expect it to increase as we get into 2019. But let's talk about some red zone stats that I thought were pretty important. So last season he had 14 targets, Tarik Cohen, had 14 targets, 11 receptions for 76 yards and 4 touchdowns in the red zone. On those 14 targets, that accounted for 18.7% of the Chicago Bears red zone targets. He tied for first with Trey Burton. So him and Trey Burton led the team in red zone targets, which led to 4 of his potential. How many touchdowns did he have again? Tarik Cohen had 8 touchdowns. So 4 of his 8 touchdowns came from the passing game in the red zone. That's 50% of his work right there. On top of that, besides the 14 targets that he had this last season and 11 receptions, he also had 13 rushing attempts for 52 yards and 2 touchdowns. So again, even though Jordan Howard was still on the team, he got 6 of his 8 touchdowns last season from the red zone. And imagine with Jordan Howard gone, I don't think Mike Davis is going to be the guy running it up the middle, completely sponging all of the fantasy value away. I think Tarik Cohen's going to see a lot more work in the red zone. I understand goal line carries. He only had 2 last season. That's not going to be his job. Mike Davis might have that, first and goal, or Trubisky's going to run that thing in. Perhaps they bring Akeem Hicks, the defensive tackle, in for a refrigerator touchdown. You never know. But I thought, having a total amount of 24 red zone touches last season, pretty good comparatively. I understand, Jordan Howard dominated the red zone attempts last season for this team, had 35 rushing attempts, and didn't do squat with them. So, I understand he got all those touchdowns, but, anybody could really be put in that position to score. But either way, talking about Tarik Cohen and Jordan Howard, going into the 2019 season specifically, who would I rather have more? I think as of right now, especially playing in a PPR format, I want to have Tarik Cohen on my team. Now, that being said, goodness, both these guys have their values are going up. And I think there are going to be sneaky running backs that many people aren't going to be looking for. Just like a guy like Devontae Freeman. This next season, not a lot of people are talking about Devontae Freeman. Why? Because the last 2 seasons, he's just been plagued with injuries, and that's hurt his fantasy value. And a lot of people already correlate the name Devontae Freeman with injury. So why not go take a gamble on him? So when people think of, okay, what has Jordan Howard done for me lately? Jordan Howard's been a bum, but now that he's given a new opportunity, goodness, he can really make a difference on the Philadelphia Eagles and be a pretty good fantasy player for 2019. So between the two, in a PPR, full PPR, I would much rather have Tarik Cohen. In a half-point PPR, I think Tarik Cohen, by the skin of his teeth, I'd rather have him over Jordan Howard. And then in a standard, I'll take Jordan Howard. So that's the breakdown that I'll have within those 3 scoring formats. Before I close out today's episode, I want to talk about a little bit of Mike Davis and what he could potentially do. Now that Jordan Howard's gone, like we expected, Mike Davis is going to get a lot of the early down work. I'm sure he is going to have I'm assuming he's going to have 150 rushing attempts this season, minimum. And with that, you have a pretty big upside going from, last season, didn't really have many rushing attempts, had to fight between him, Chris Carson, and Rashad Penny in the running game. I understand the Seattle Seahawks ran the ball, a lot last season. They were second in rushing attempts. So, to be honest, a lot of Mike Davis's work last season was dictated on the fact that they ran the ball a lot and that the Seattle Seahawks offensive line was just dominating up front. So, obviously, I expect him to have a good amount of rushing attempts. I expect him to be of the similar value of a Latavius Murray come this season. A guy that is not going to be the starting running back, not going to get work in the passing game, but is going to get goal line touches, is going to be behind a pretty good offensive line and find himself with some pretty good fantasy value going into the season. Again, like I mentioned, the Eagles, they're the 5th rated offensive line according to Pro Football Focus last season. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Chicago Bears were the 11th ranked offensive line. And the quick stat that I have was that they were second best when it comes to pass blocking efficiency, the Chicago Bears, with guys like Kyle Long, Cody Whitehair, Bobby Massey. This offensive line, they're set themselves. And it helps that the pass blocking of that team is pretty efficient, considering Tarik Cohen's going out for a lot of passes. But anyway, I think Jordan Howard, Tarik Cohen, Mike Davis, all 3 of them are going to be fantasy relevant this season, of course. But the value of All three of them has just increased. Yesterday, I think I drafted Tarik Cohen in the 5th round. Yeah, end of the 4th, early 5th. That's not going to be the case. I think that's going to increase. I think people are going to take him earlier, and especially because Jordan Howard's gone, and he's just going to get that many more touches going into 2019. But either way, I think both these guys are RB2s. Tarik Cohen could potentially vie in a full PPR, could sneak into that RB1 conversation because of the reception count. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching. If you haven't already and you like the content, click that subscribe button. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Who do you think is going to be the better running back come 2019? It's really a debate on our hands as of right now. But anyway, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, stay classy, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.